we're in halacha yud, kufi beis halacha yud. The Mechaber says, if a guy cooked in an oven 3 times in one day, and the first 2 times of the day, the yid remembered to do hashlachas kisem to make it pass Yisroel. But the 3rd time he forgot, he didn't do hashlachas kisem. So Mechaber says the din is that the food is mutter, because the way the Yisroel explains it, there are still coals left from the 1st and 2nd fire into the 3rd fire. Those fires were made by the yid, and they're considered, the yid did something to make it a fire of the yid. So those coals last into the 3rd fire. So the 3rd fire has leftovers from the Jew's fire. That's considered to be past Yisroel also.
Why do you need 2 times? Why does
it doesn't. That's a story that he was talking about. The Shiloh and the Rishonim is about that kind of case. Everybody says that if it will be 1 time, it will be Davki. Yeah, right. The point here is just that
the oven is not good for the 3rd time, or 1 time will be good for the 2nd?
For the 3rd time, so good for the whole day. It's because the fires with logs or with coal, and so the things lasted from one to the other. It wasn't like in our oven that if you turned it off, it's gone.
It's here, like from H to H.
In a little bit of a sense, yes.
I hear you.
The Rema says, the Rema says another case. If the yid was machshel tanner, meaning he did hashlachas kisem, and the tanner didn't sit for 24 hours without being lit, meaning it was on or warm for never off for 24 hours, then a few awful by kama yomim, even if you cook like this for many days, meaning on Sunday the yid did something kisem, they cooked for 5 hours, and then it stayed off for 10 hours. And then on Monday they cooked more, and they kept going on and off like that. From the first hechsher, the first hashlachas kisem, and we'll make konis. Okay, so here there are most cases that the oven was not only you didn't just go from one baking to another. The oven was completely off, so to speak. It was off, but their oven was not like ours. The oven was a big, heavy brick or clay or metal oven. So those ovens hold their heat for a very long time. Like in a pizza oven. I mean, they don't cool down in 10 minutes. It's nice and hot for a long time. So that oven, it stays for the yid, his hashlachas kisem, the Rema says even if it goes 24 hours, meaning even as long as it doesn't cool down. That's the point, that doesn't cool down.
Temperature that it has.
We'll come to that in 1 second.
Hold on.
We'll come to that in 1 second, yes. Okay, so now what's the reason for this din? Where did this din in the Mechaber? Where did that din come from? So when the Beis Yosef brings his din from a Mordechai, he brings that the Mordechai said first he thought it should be asur, but then he says since we hold that hashlachas kisem works, so that teaches us that all the yid has to do is make a hecker. All the yid has to do is make a hecker. So he says, so this is a hecker. He says because his thing is still left over into the next fire. Okay, so we're even willing to take, even though the yid didn't actually help the cooking. You know, if you don't hold up hashlachas kisem, it means your whole yid has to do something that helps the cooking. That's how other Rishonim hold. We paskin that you just have to do hashlachas kisem, any little hecker counts. So he says this is also a hecker. Okay, and the Gemara brings this down. He says that these things are considered like hashlachas kisem. Okay, it has the same idea of it, meaning you made a hecker just like by hashlachas kisem. Okay, and that hesber has 2 very practical applications. Okay.
That's a question. Now, if you hold hashlachas kisem, it has to be done after the fire is lit.
That's the first application. Rabbi Shachter used this then as a raya that you see that you could do hashlachas kisem even before the fire is lit. Because in this case, the yid, let's say the Mechaber's case, the first 2 times the yid did hashlachas kisem, then they put out that fire. In effect, they put out the fire.
The fire was out.
They finished baking. Now the third thing, they lit up again and said, now there's probably some warm coal still sitting around in the oven.
And they continuation of the first one.
But there, the kisem, the yid's participation was there before the guy built his 3rd fire. Yet that still counts.
I don't know that it's a chelik still from the 3rd fire. It's an extension.
Take the Rama's case. They mamish turned the oven off completely for 10 hours. There was nothing to do, but it was warm in the chamber. And that warmth is considered a hashlachas kisem because it helps relight the fire the next time. The warmth helps in the... But the point is, the Mordechai saying is you don't have to help the cooking, you have to just have some kind of a hecker. And that hecker that you have, which is not helping the cooking, that hecker was there before the guy built his fire. So Rabbi Shachter brought this as a raya that against Rabbi Elsi, that you're allowed to use, that the kisem can be before the fire. There's no such thing that the kisem has to be after the fire. Okay. That's the first point. Right? The second one is, Yankis, which is how hot do you have to keep the oven when you do we say it has to, the according to it has to stay warm or hot from one cooking to the next.
Right.
So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach told Rebelsky that it has to stay hot enough that you could cook at. Okay, Shlomo Zalman told Rebelsky that hot enough for cooking means it has to be 80 degrees Celsius. Okay, which in Fahrenheit sounds much more exact. We say 176 degrees. Sounds like very like years of research, but it was 80 degrees Celsius. That's a nice even number, an amount for cooking. And after Rebelsky told me this once, I went home, and next time my wife made challah, I took a piece of dough, plopped it into the oven, and left it there at 175 degrees to see what would happen. Okay? And after a couple,
keep the 175, you mean?
you put the thermostat to 175. Put the thermostat to 175.
It's digital.
And 4 hours, I think it was about 4 hours later, it was bread. It was fine. You could eat it. It was no problem. Okay? So I was all excited. Until the next time my wife made challah, and I put it into the oven at 150 degrees. Right? It doesn't prove anything. No, and that the next
6 hours.
No, it took 10 hours. The next morning, it was also fine bread, but they thought that didn't count. Somehow that didn't count. Okay, so it has to be. We say it has to go for. It has to be enough that you should be able to cook at a cooking temperature. So 176 degrees. They decided it's cooking temperature. You could bake bread. And Rabbi Schechter asked just a kasha, just like a side question, which is that's fine for baking. How do you know that for cooking? What temperature you need to get? Okay, but the problem is
You're not going to cook anything at 170.
What?
You need hashlachas.
To cook.
You're not going to.
Water?
I've done tests.
You mean water? You mean so it'll depend on the food. When you're
We've
going to
done
need
tests in a Shabbos oven, about heating and putting it in.
Yeah.
And you put it in overnight, like 100, 200 or whatever. It ain't going to do it.
Okay. So now, but the problem is that in this case,
You need a certain temperature.
the din that we're talking about over here, the Mordechai says, I thought that it shouldn't work because what you're doing is not doing anything for the cooking. But then I said, no, you know what? All you need is a hecker, just like a hashlachas kisem. You just need a hecker. So therefore, even though the heat is not going to, it's not such a big deal. You could still count it anyhow. Now, doesn't that sound like you could use any heat? Doesn't he sound like the Rama says his reason? The document says the reason is because the warmth from the oven helps you relight it. What does that do to the cooking temperature? Where did it come from that there should be such a chiv to have a cooking temperature? It has to just be warm. The point is just there's a little bit of heat left over the juice fire. That little bit of heat is the continuation of the juice hecker. If it cools off completely, the hecker is gone.
Right.
So the truth is that there's really no. We can't find any makar for saying that you should really need to have a cooking temperature. The simple thing is, which is Rabbi Schwartz holds, I heard Rabbi Shelder holds like that also, in Lakewood, that you just need to have warmth. I mean, something over ambient temperature. As long as there's still just a room temperature. As long as
If I'm out here and it's 75 degrees and I walk in the oven, it's 85, then that's
as long as it's hotter.
These step ovens like you have in a bakery where it's a rack oven.
Yes.
They stay hot for hours.
That's the point. Is as long as it stays warmer, as long as it stays hotter than the temperature in the room, that means the Yitz fire still has some
continuation,
still has some effect, and therefore that's considered that it's you're able to take Kashrus.
Does this have anything to do with what you said last time about the bulb in the oven?
Well, if the bulb would keep the chamber warmer than room temperature, yes, that would work. But it's not going to. The bulb doesn't do nothing. The question here is, you lit a fire and then the fire went out, and now the chamber still stayed warm. That's good enough. If you relight that fire, it's still Yisroel. And l'chayra, it seems from this din that it could be any warmth. And there's another thing. You maybe don't think this is a raya, but until 10 years ago, how come none of the poskim give a shear to how hot it has to be? The din says as long as it stayed warm. And nobody feels like they have to say something as to what the shear is. Everybody, for the past 400 years, since the Rambam died, where's everybody been? So because that's an implication, the way the simple, I think the din implies, the way Rabbi Schwartz holds, which is that any warmth is enough, and you don't need to have a specific temperature that you should have, okay? And this whole din, you should just know, I'm sort of not, okay, we'll come back to it in a second, that part. Okay. Anyway, so those are the two nafkaminis just from understanding the din. Okay, now, the Mechaber said you have to, he gave an example that you lit the fire, 2 times he had lit it, and there were some coals left over to the third fire. And the Ramah said a case where the fire went out, and it could stay out for hours and hours as long as it stayed warm in the chamber. Okay, do they hold like each other, or they're arguing on each other? Okay, of course the Ramah holds like the Mechaber. Does the Mechaber hold to the Ramah's case? The Ramah said if you turn off the fire completely, and they say, well, does he hold of that case? Okay, would he hold that that's good enough also? What do you say, David? Yeah.
Exactly.
Imagine the Mechaber.
Hold like the Ramah.
Most killers more even make all of them.
Oh, sorry, the Mordechai is an extension, right? The second Mordechai is an extension,
No, the Mordechai, which is the Mechaber, is
more partial.
first. Because why is it more partial?
because it's mamish cold there.
Right,
Okay.
and it's still hot. And it's still the
If you look
fire
at
is there.
Marchem B'Sheitim, I haven't seen it in the recently, but it's mashma, but it's Marchem is extending for the first and the second one. It's not so posh.
It's a chelik from the first
So,
one.
so what David's remembering from,
Way back then.
Yesterday.
when he learned it was that the Beis Yosef brings the Ramaz din first, like a page before him. Brings that Ramaz. He brings this din that it works that if you turn off the oven, even a day later you could. This is how he says it. Even if a day later you could still relight it.
Right.
He says the kuli yiserihi. Okay, it seems like a extreme kula. A page later he brings the Mordechai and he's very happy with that. Okay, so the simple reading of the
He argues.
of the Beis Yosef is he doesn't hold like the Rama. Okay, the Rama who agrees with that case. The simple reading is the Mechaber doesn't hold to that case. Okay, and the Chavkus B'Yom Taka says that, and then he has to try to understand what's the difference between the cases. What's really the difference? Why is one a kisem and one is not? And whatever has he has to has
But the first one there's cold left.
and therefore what? What's the difference?
So it's an extension, it's like the first fire.
Temperature's an absent abstract
You
thing.
need something physical.
Right.
You need a physical thing.
You didn't even see us.
What's the definition of hacker?
Hecker means something to record a marker, something that shows that you can only use this food because that you participated. You don't have to actually help in the cooking, but it has to have done something that makes the point that you can't eat this food unless I participate, and that sort of separates the chaslas. I'm not going to mingle with them so much as whenever we want to cook.
It's a reminder.
I can't eat all your food always. I have to do this little separate.
I think it's correct to mention the Rashba's Lashon, who is the one who brings this kisem idea, says the word is the hakir shepitom osus. Betem is taka pasakum. But betem is really paspalt, right? But just to remind you that pas akum is osur, so if you do a hacker, it reminds you that pas akum is osur.
Okay.
That's Lashon Rashba.
Fine. Okay.
That's about
So to remind you. Okay. Now, the thing is, even though you might think that that's a
That really it's us, but this is...
even though it's a simple reading of the Beis Yosef, okay, the Gross says that that's not true. The Gross says, in explaining the Mechaber, he says, because you just need a kisem and it's still warm, he says, in kol shekain, if you have actual coals, in the words of the Mechaber, he says, because it's still warm, so he says, and kol shekain, the actual coals makes it even better than that. Okay, and in Svara, warmth is, hecker is hecker, it shouldn't make such a difference. So what are we going to say about this question? The Beis Yosef, when he says it, says, the kuli yiserihi, like, he sure sounds like he doesn't hold like it. Okay? And the answer is that if you look at the document on that words, the kuli yiserihi, right, the document says, he says, this is from a Ogur, Sefer Ogur. So he says, the Sefer Ogur maybe means, when he says that if you turn the fire off, even a day later you could use it, that maybe means is in a case where the oven happened to stay warm. In other words, he's seeing that the Beis Yosef held, it's a kuli yiserihi to say that you could rely on the oven you lit yesterday if it cooled off. Because he was thinking that the he was thinking that the Ogur was saying is once you light it, you could use it even the next day, even if it doesn't stay warm. So the Rama says, no. He doesn't mean that. He means that if it stayed warm, then the heck would continue, and then you could use it.
So then why would you ever have to...
I would tell you what...
What'd you say?
According to that, why do they...
Well, why?
So you would maybe think, so he's
But why would you even do that? So you
you
could turn on the oven, put a fire, and light the oven.
Turn it off.
And then that's it, forever.
No, so it's not forever. The point being is that for whatever time you would think that maybe that should say is, since you can't, every week I have to come light the board. I have to light the fire again. So every week I have to light it, so that reminds you. The point is just to make a hecker that I have to participate. What's really the difference if every Sunday morning I have to come in, or I have to come every time you light
Give me a time limit.
You're making it up.
No, I'm not making it. I'm telling you.
You're making the time.
No, I am. I agree. I'm telling you, but the way the Ramah said, maybe, this is how he says, maybe. The Ogur talking about it, as in, the Beis Yosef didn't understand that way, and therefore the Beis Yosef said this is cooler. So Ramah's like, I figured out a way to answer the pshat. As if he was reading that the Beis Yosef didn't think that was the case.
Okay, well, can I just add, maybe the Hezbollah is, there would be a time limit. It can't be that you light it one time, it cools off that. But it could be that as long as, I know wood that burns already, it's easier to light and it makes it much easier for fires to go on. So maybe he would need to say is as long as those wood pieces are still intact, that it's moisif and it makes it easier to light the other ones, then it's considered still an ekra for pasro. But about 2 weeks later when that's gone, then it can help.
Okay. Anyhow,
It makes no sense.
Why would it be gone?
It makes no sense. What do you mean cool? It makes no sense. You're right. It makes no sense. It's not called a kuli yisera. It's not a kula. It makes no sense.
the cool would be to say is the Yid just has to something to show. You can't.
So polish the oven. Go ahead and move. It makes. Why would it make any sense? I'm just saying.
No.
Okay.
Huh? Higgin wherever, whatever the door.
And just to review what I don't remember for sure. For this particular Indian of helping cook, the Jew could put the pot in the fire also.
Yes.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Eisenbach. The truth of the matter is, you could put the pot in the fire also.
Correct.
Okay. So, if you turn on, if you light a pilot light on an oven,
Correct.
and the Jew never turns on the particular flame that you're going to cook with,
Correct.
it's still participating. But that's mamish. That's ambient temperature.
Right.
That is ambient.
But it's the fires there.
But that's because
But the fire is over there. You're talking about an oven where the heat is in the oven and it's still participating. The fire is not even participating. The only way that fire is going to get over here is if the goy takes and turns on the gas and the gas forms a line. It has no shaykhus to the Jew. No shaykhus whatsoever. It's absolutely irrelevant. It's just that the Jew happens to be participating in some way, which you're talking about the hecker, is that it's a participation. It has no shaykhus to the flame.
let's say. Okay. Now I want to say there's another way to say that. Okay, I have to tell you. That's another way to say why I'll get back. Let's do it afterwards. Another reason to say why they don't argue, which is there's a din. It's coming soon, and it's again. Well, the Shach mentions it over here. It's also in Kufi Gimel that if you have a suffix, if the yid lit the fire, we may call about that. Okay, suffix of is mutter also. Okay, so that maybe the Ugur, maybe the Beis Yosef thought that the Ugur was saying that even if you don't know that it stayed warm, but it maybe stayed warm, that might also be. To which the Dr. Moshe would be saying that maybe the Ugur meant it in the case when you know that it was. So the Beis Yosef may be saying is that it's a kuli asera to say that just because it might have stayed warm, it's good enough.
So side pass.
In which case, the Rama would be saying is, no, he didn't mean when it's maybe stayed warm. It's only meant that if it's for sure stayed warm. Okay, maybe that's how you read. But my point is, I'm trying to give you Hezberim, but the Gra learns that the Mechaber agrees to the Ramos. That's what I'm trying to explain to you, and just answer you this deed that the Beis Yosef said it's a
with Agar.
Okay. Okay, we have two more questions we have to deal with. Okay, first is, how long, which you sort of mentioned, sort of like in passing, how long can this thing last? We said if the yid lights the fire, and then the oven goes off, you say it's, even though the oven is off, it stayed warm, and you relit it, it's considered the continuation of the yid's fire. How long can that go for? So that Tshuva brings a number of achronim, none of whom I've yet been able to find. Okay, one sefer, I have the wrong song. I'm looking in place. I haven't been able to find it. Who say
that Tshuva is most foreign in Bar London.
Who says the Dr. Tshuva brings a number of achronim who say that this din, that if it stays warm, it only lasts for a week. A week. Okay? If you light it today, it's Friday. If you light the fire today on Friday, and then it went off, and then on and off and on, it can only last till next Friday. After a week, the yid has to come and relight it again. Okay, that's what he brings. Now, he doesn't say Hezber, and I haven't been able to get this from him, so I don't really know what the Hezber is. The only thing he brings is that when the Teres Chatas, that's the Ramah, brings this in, he says, if you lit the fire, and it went off, and it stayed off for a day, and blah, 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 even till the end of the week, it still works. Okay, so the case he's using is till the end of the week, and they're understanding that that's very literal, that it's only till the end of the week, and somehow it expires. In other words, there's like a limit to how long you could take this hecker kind of a thing, that when the fire actually went off. So, till the end of the week, fine. You can do it till the end of the week.
As long as the heat is still in there.
When the Jew first lit it?
I don't know what he means. When, I'm not sure what he means.
And that's as long as the heat is still retained in that.
Right, when the Ramah says that if it stays warm, you can use it, that has an expiration.
Correct.
It only lasts for a week.
Expiration dates.
Okay.
So that has nothing to do with the fire still on.
Right. No, we're not when the fire's on. Now the truth
the heat is still
that Kashrus himself brings, and you will notice that the accepted din is not to follow the shita. Okay, and we say it'll last, it's... What?
Where do you see that?
Where did I see?
We don't follow that shita.
Dr. Tshuva himself, first of all, the end of Dr. Tshuva is that he doesn't hold of it.
Right.
So he brings the shita,
Yeah.
and just practically, because
Where's it again?
Where's it again?
We're not talking when the fire is on, when there's a pilot on, or...
No, we're talking when the fire's out. Okay, you'll hear the case that it's again to possibly in a second. Okay?
Yeah.
That it lasts forever. Okay, now, I have to tell you, just as an aside, just because it was an interesting einstein, is that in the Chalkus Binyam, in one of his siyunim, he brings a hezber, sort of like a compromise. That's the best way I can call it. Which is maybe
Who's this?
maybe you'll say that this expiration of a week, maybe when it says in the Rema, it works to the end of the week, is real. He really means it. Okay, it's not just a coincidence. He happened to be talking about a case. He really means it. But the hezber is not because there's an expiration date, but it's because on Sunday the Goyim closes stores. The Goyim don't bake for religious reasons. They don't bake on Sundays. So the Rema said, you can only do this as long as the oven doesn't go off for 24 hours, because or else it cools down completely. So when you come to the end of the week, the Goyim close up shop, and they don't open up for 24 hours. So just for so to speak, practical purposes, at the end of the week, you're going to have to redo it.
Because it's Friday, then it went off, you'll have to realize it's Sunday.
Exactly. It's not a 7-day expiration date. It's just at the end of the week, it goes, what means, because at the end of the week, they're going to close down for Sunday, they're not going to do any baking. So Mamela, it's not going to be warm. So
24/7 means that.
So then, in which case, if you have a place that Taka runs 24/7, or they run through that Sunday, so then it's also it stays warm.
The holiday season had to be open, right?
Okay, now, the last thing I have to tell you on this part is that, so this is a din, and we're saying, no, we don't hold like this from the din perspective, there's no expiration date. Rabelski has what he calls a hashkafa point, which he says is, the point of Bishul or Pas Yisrael is that we're supposed to say, I can't eat his food unless I participate in the cooking. Okay, his food is not mutter unless I participate. So he said, it doesn't make sense to say that I can do something that I'll never have to participate. He says, you're missing the point. The point here is, the Yid has to continuously participate in the cooking. So you say, if I lit the fire and it stays on, it lasts for a certain amount of time. He says, but how can it last forever? The word forever is defeating the purpose. The whole point here is to say, you're going to have to be involved in... Okay, so the answer, I actually was about to say the opposite point. Okay, you said, how does the Musar get into the hashkafa? I think it's the other way around. The whole din of Bishul Yisroel or Pas Yisroel is a hashkafa. The din is based on so to speak, a hashkafa. It's based on we want to keep away from chasnas. We're avoiding intermarriage by doing this. So that means to say the feeling of it, the what do we have to do to avoid intermarriage is very much part of the din. Okay, so Rabelski has this thing, he tells people when they go to companies, he says, if you go every month, you should be relighting the boiler also. Not as in there's an official expiration date that can only last for 32 days. It's just he says, every time when you go, you should be relighting the boiler.
You go to the supermarket, I shouldn't remember because the guy mashgiach somewhere.
Oh, okay.
If you use that smart, then the Moshe Torah applies.
Counter anyways.
Okay. Now, lastly is, and this is going to sort of be what David is, which is like this. What the Rama said about the oven staying warm.
Yes.
It would seem is the hezber for how we make food Bishul Yisroel in a modern oven.
In a modern oven.
What I mean is like this. In the ovens that they had 500 years ago, you lit the fire and you cooked your food. The fire, once you lit the fire was on. It was like a matzah oven. The fire just stays on. But in my oven at home, it has a thermostat. And what happens is, if I set the oven to 350, for 10 minutes the oven goes on, and then it hits 350, then the fire turns off. So how come if the Yid lit the fire, and then a guy cooks 3 hours later, why is it the Yid's fire? The Yid's fire that he lit went out after 10 minutes. After a few minutes, the fire went out, and then it goes off, and it goes on. So the only thing that was done here in the cooking was the guy put the food into the oven. So why don't we say that all the food, how can I make any food Bishul Yisroel in an oven like we have that goes on and off, it has a thermostat to go on and off, when the Yid's fire is long gone? So in other words, what I'm trying to say to you is that the reason why it is Bishul Yisroel is because when I lit the fire, I warmed up the chamber. It never cooled down. Between when I lit it and he cooked, it never cooled down. So what the Ramah says, that if it stays warm, it's considered the Yid's fire, is the reason why in an oven that works on a thermostat or in a boiler that also cycles on and off, I can make a Bishul Yisroel, because when I light it now, it made it hot, and then it never cooled down before he put the food in. So it stays Bishul Yisroel. Okay, so it's going to come out that if according to this, it'll come out that what the Ramah says here, that you're staying warm, which is sounds like a very theoretical, not so practical thing, will be every time you light a boiler or an oven, that's really what you're doing. You're lighting it for a few minutes, and then 5 hours later when they cook, that cooking is being done because you made the chamber warm, and anything that comes afterwards is your participation.
Like you point out, if it happens by mistake that in a restaurant or wherever where the akum turns on the fire and it reaches a temperature, now you got to go ahead and do it. You got to turn it off, wait till it cools off. Are you just adding, fiddling around with it is a joke?
Yes.
You
Okay.
have to wait till it cools off, so you're being massive and doing something to the cooking.
I agree with what you said. I'm not so sure fit right into here, but okay. Yes, it's true. Okay.
You have to let it cool down?
A little bit.
We'll talk about that afterwards. It didn't fit right into here.
I thought it did.
Okay. So now,
That's okay. I'm not arguing.
if according to what I just said to you,
Take it off the record, please.
according to what I just said to you, this has an even more. So what I just told you is theory, but it has a very practical application, which is by a convection oven. Okay, what's a convection oven? A convection oven is a plain oven, but it has a fan right opposite the door. Okay, and the back wall of the oven has a fan on it that helps circulate the air, and that somehow helps in the
Right.
cooking. Okay, now, what happens is, if you think about it, if there's a fan blowing from the back, every time you open the oven door, you're going to get hot air blown in your face. Okay, so what they do is, in a regular oven, it's just warm. It is warm, but in a convection oven, it's even worse because it blows right in your face.
Automatic.
So in a convection oven, every convection oven has, when you open the door, the fan goes off. That's automatic. But in many of them, the fire that's in the convection oven also goes off. Okay, it's just a sort of a so-called safety feature, safety for the operator, the guy opening the door, that everything goes off and the oven stops for while you have the door open.
Correct.
So now, if you just open it for a second, take something out and put it back in, the convection oven will stay hot, like the Rema said. But what happens if you're in the middle, you have to empty out 10 trays out of the convection oven. And then the door is open while they're going to get the next 10 trays out of the fridge to put them into the oven. You can leave the door open for 15, 20 minutes. Okay, it could stay open for a long time while they're emptying and busy. While they're busy, no one's opening it. And all that time, the oven is off.
Right.
In a regular oven, when you open the door, the oven stays on. So it's staying warm because the fire keeps on going on and off. But in the convection oven, once you open the door, everything is dead. If it stays open for too long, what might happen is, the oven will cool off completely, in which case, when eventually when they get all the food in and they close the door, that, now that the fire goes on, has no warmth left over from the yid, in which case the food won't be Kashrus. So the yid lit the fire at 8 o'clock in the morning, but 3 hours later when they left the door for a long time, the oven completely cooled off, at which point you need to relight it. Okay? So this is,
Just point out one thing. You're
Yes.
speaking in an oven that has no pilot lights.
of course, that's a different way of dealing with it. Yes, that's it. So there are two ways to deal with this. There are two ways that people deal with this issue with the convection oven.
Over here.
There are two ways people deal with it. One way is that they tell the mashgiach to keep his eyes on the door. Don't let the door stay open for too long. In each place outside, it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever they want.
5 minutes.
Keep your eye on the door and don't do it. Okay? There's a more sophisticated way to deal with it. Okay? A more lumdish way to deal with it, which is, instead of telling him, the mashgiach, always watch the door and don't leave the door for more than 15 minutes. Okay? One guy had a parking meter timer. Stop, and it would go off every time the mashgiach passed by. He'd put on his watch, and 15 minutes later it would ring again. And we'd have to come by there again and check that there's no one doing anything.
You don't need 15 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes?
Wow.
5 to
Open?
6
How long
minutes.
does it take to go cool off?
I mean, 5 minutes is where it drops below 170.
Okay, so we passed 170 a long time ago. Okay,
175.
105. Okay, so we passed that a long time ago. So however long it
You
takes.
think after 5 minutes it'll still be 170 degrees? 105
Yeah.
minutes?
In that oven?
Now, the
Convection ovens?
convection oven, it's a full-size oven, but it has just a fan.
You think of a confectionery oven,
Okay, so
not a confectionery oven.
but there's another way to deal with it. Another way to deal with it is like this. How long does it take to cook a piece of chicken? Let's say it takes an hour to cook a piece of chicken. Okay? What happens if the guy would have lit the fire and put the food in? That's what you're saying is happening. It's cool, so the guy lit the fire and he put the food in. It takes an hour to cook the piece of chicken. The yid doesn't have to participate at the beginning of the cooking. Okay? The yid can participate later in the cooking also. He doesn't have to show up the first minute. So the more sophisticated way of dealing with this is to say is, instead of the yid always keeping his eye on the door and saying, don't let that door ever stay open for more than this many minutes, the yid every half hour will open the doors of the convection oven and then reclose them. Figuring that even if someone put food in, the oven had cooled off and someone put food in, that food's not fully cooked yet. So the yid just has to do something for the cooking before the food gets fully cooked.
Does it have to be mice of something to it?
He has to make a hecker in it.
That's the
Yes, we
heck.
That's why it's better.
No,
No, it doesn't.
sorry, no, it doesn't.
As long as you make it, even like
The second way is
bread,
Kashrus, we're not good to know
as
how.
long as you mash them something in it,
You design the
that's
high
considered
chicken
Kashrus.
Okay, because the chicken, okay.
Like, yeah, I'll give you an example. Let me give you an example.
A bake-off.
A bake-off. You can eat a bake-off
Doesn't have to
beforehand.
be- it doesn't have
A lot
to
of it is
be
baked already, most of it.
No,
Breads.
for sure, according to the Rama, it's in the first term. We know that
It's
he
like
finishes.
bread, but I'm talking about dish.
Rama, it's in Kufyut Gimel. It's in Bishlakim. Even later, the Yid could help in the cooking.
Mhm.
And the truth is, when we'll get to it, there's a Mechaber who implies there are times he holds you can do it also. Even
Doesn't
for
fit in here.
But for sure, according to the Rama. No,
Doesn't
it's
fit in
fine. It
here.
does fit. It's good enough. Okay. But now, I just told you why there's a special thing about a convection oven. And in fact, that's what we would do. Okay. However, you maybe it's been too many weeks, but the last time we learned, okay, we heard something else, a completely different way to understand things that will obviate this whole issue. Okay?
What does that mean?
Make it clear.
No, make it go away.
You want to translate to us.
Make it not make it good. We saw in halacha test that that if a person starts up a piece of machinery. In the case there was he starts up a machine that spins makes strings for tzitzis. Okay, he starts up a machinery. Everything that happens that machine does is considered that the yid did it, or that the person did it, in this case, that a human did it, even though the things that happen are secondary or very far
Well,
from what he
we're learning
did.
the Mechaber then.
Even though they're very indirectly related to what he did, if he started the machine, okay, then that's considered, everything that machine does is considered his action,
Right.
even though it's very far removed, it's not a kashrus, it's very far removed from what he did. Since I started the process, everything that flows from it is considered that I did, okay?
Rabbi Belsker, Rabbi Schachter?
But, so, that was negated to something that we
Yeah.
all do, which is when you light a boiler, that when you press the button of the boiler does not go on, okay? There's many steps before the boiler actually goes on. It's not, in din, it's not a koich rishon, but because I started the process, everything that happens is considered my koich rishon. So, when I come in the morning, there's different ways to make the convection oven, or any oven for that matter, into a yid's fire. One way is to just adjust the temperature, do hashlachas kisem. But what happens if the yid actually turned on the boiler, or he turned on the fire? Not that he adjusted it. It was off, and he walked in the morning and he flipped the switch to turn it on.
Electric.
He turned on the whole convection oven. So now, an hour later, when the guy opens the door and it cools off completely, when he later closes the door to relight the fire,
Because
it's
he-
still my turning on the fire in the morning that's making this work.
Why?
So
Because if it was off, it wouldn't turn back on.
I turned the oven on. Now, he did something that
Safe that
stopped it, paused it for a second.
No, it's a
He
safe
didn't turn it off.
turn it off.
He just opened the door that
For all intents and purposes, turn
No, it's not.
temporarily off.
Off.
For example,
But you need a human action of you to turn it back on. It's like if I turn on the knob, the gas, right, and the God puts on the fire, right? You tell me that's my fire.
say it again. If I
I turn the knob in the oven to on, right?
Yes.
To gas
Start.
come out, and then the God puts on the fire, right?
yes.
Is that my action?
I didn't turn on the heat there.
You did, but in this case, I didn't do that. I turned on the fire. I actually got the
turned
oven
it
on.
on.
I turned
No,
it.
he turned the fire back on.
No, I turned it on. Okay, in order to get this oven to work, you have to get the fire on, and you have the door closed. So
Right.
I had the fire on, and it was burning, and it was doing fine.
No,
2 hours later, he opened the door, and
Everything went off.
he temporarily put it off. He didn't turn it off. He temporarily put it off.
It's all completely, unless someone's going to go ahead and close the door, and that is going to
The guy
happen.
threw
It's
a bucket
all-
of water in the fire. It's only temporarily off until he relights it.
He doesn't have to relight it. He has to just remove
That's
it.
the
He has to
same
take
thing.
He has to
take
remove
away.
the safety valve.
Same thing.
Yeah,
That's the same
no, it's
thing.
not.
No, it's not.
Doesn't it?
Because if the switch had been turned off, his opening the door and closing it does nothing.
Right, fine, but the mice it wasn't. The fire went off, so it turned it off.
The fire went off.
Right, 'cause it's off. That's off now. It's not there anymore. It's off.
A lot like electricity where you stop electricity from running, but it's still there. That I can understand. It's like
What's over here?
over here, there's no fire.
But it's all, the machine is ready to burn. It was burning, and he puts it. He temporarily stopped the fire from
It's
burning.
not all completely, and never gonna.
He didn't stop the fire. He
This man went
closed
to
the
school
fire.
to see
He
this.
never. You understand the difference?
No.
Stopping the fire, or temporarily stopping the fire, is electricity. Because the switch lets it run, and when you switch it, it stops, but it's there. when you open the convection oven, the H is gone completely.
Yes.
So how do you get the H again? You do another microwave.
But your action alone, closing the door, will not put on the fire on the oven. If the
It
oven
needed
was
to
off,
turn down
if the
before
oven
that.
had been switched, was off, and you open and close the door, nothing happened.
May law,
But you
the
did.
May law, according to this, you could use
You have no problem with anything.
a clock, a time switch, for lights. You can do that every morning in a restaurant. You can click on at 6 o'clock as long as you the yid, set it up.
No.
Wait, who turned the switch off? Because if you just set a timer, that also doesn't do anything.
If you wouldn't have done that switch, where it turns on in the morning, it turns off at
No,
night.
because you just switched roles. You did the unimportant part by setting the timer, and the guy who turns on the oven is doing the real thing.
No, the
In
oven
our
is
case,
turned on by
the
you.
guy who turns on the
No,
convection
put off
oven,
the timer.
right? So you setting the timer is doing the unimportant part.
No, it's turning on the oven.
I'm sorry that
No,
works.
this is Rabbi Shach that says this.
So I'm the man. He's the man.
He says, and the reason why, he says, and that's why in a regular oven, in a home oven, when you say this to a person, he says, the reason why in a home oven, the reason why it's Bishul Yisroel, the reason why it's Bishul Yisroel is because even though I turned the whole fire on, so I asked you before, and I said, but the fire goes off.
So
He said,
it's
no,
not heat.
it stays warm in the oven. Okay, that's
how
I'm
it's
giving like a
Rema.
hesper. But when I first said it to you, you're like, huh? That's why it works. Like, I guess so. I never thought of it like that, but I guess that's why it works. He says, no, when you turn on the oven in the morning and it stays on for 2 hours, who made the fire? The guy who turned on the oven made the fire. So it goes on and off. All those actions are all my actions. Okay. So,
Wait a second.
So-
for sure in case if we're stuck on something.
okay, so
Let's hear the other side.
I said to you, and I said before I started telling you this,
With alleviate all
that
problems.
we don't do this. I told you before, we don't do this. I didn't mean to say that we do this. We, in fact, insist that the mashgiach should not let the door stay open for too long, or if it stays open, he has to redo it, etc., etc. I'm saying to you, the way we said last time, that there's a starting up a machine has a special strength to it. That whatever comes from that, even though people are doing things in between, that would potentially be a reason to be made. Okay, I actually heard this week, okay, from that a prominent Paisik thought that you don't need to do this. You need to have the yid always closed, keep those doors closed. Okay, and we're giving a possible hezbollah for that shita.
So if you-
I'm not saying we do that. We don't
This
do
would
that.
be an example at the ACO convention. If you would have talked about Bishul Yisroel, you could have said the sheet that there are people that hold this way.
I don't know. Maybe.
I mean, you have Rav Shachter.
Okay. But
He's a fine man. I met him.
we don't do. I'm going to repeat it another bunch of times.
I gotta go to this.
When you